Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting the supremely arrogant Slaanesh Chaos Space Marines of the Flawless Host for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. Now these guys make a really interesting subject for an army because their colour scheme is really unusual for Chaos Space Marines, and so in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting them from start to finish that can be applied to just about anything in the army so that you can paint your host to perfection. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. What makes the colour scheme of the Flawless Host unusual compared to other Chaos Space Marine warbands is that their trim is not actually a set separate colour from the armour panels. So in this case we don't have to start out by painting that coloured trim, instead we'll be blocking it in with the other main colours on the miniature. There are two tones on this colour scheme, kind of a pale flesh tone and also a deep purple. And it makes sense to start out with that more pale flesh tone here because it is the majority of the colour scheme. So for that reason it's a good idea to undercoat your model with quite a light colour. My choice here has been Wraithbone spray from Citadel, but anything like this will be absolutely fine. And what you need to do is start out with that pale colour. Now Games Workshop's never really set a hard and fast rule as to what exactly this colour is, but basically just some sort of light skin tone will be absolutely fine. In this case I'm going to be using some elven skin, and to apply it what you need is a rough base coating brush. So the one I've got here is a medium base coat brush from Citadel. As usual we just need to start out by thinning the paint down to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then it's just a matter of roughly blocking in all the parts you want to be this colour. Now the general pattern is going to be here to do a darker purple on his right arm, so just along there, and the lower legs too. So I'm going to be base coating everything else, but if you want to mix it up, feel free to do so. It's just a matter of making sure you block in these parts at this stage. Once you're happy with that initial colour, we can then move on to the secondary colour of this scheme, which is to have a really deep, rich purple. And for this, I'm going to be using some Amethyst Rain. And the reason why we're applying this one secondly, so after that initial pale skin tone, is because this colour is stronger, meaning any mistakes we made with the previous colour will now cover over really easily. If you do it the other way around, it'll take a little bit longer and be a bit more tricky. So that's why we're doing it like this. But to apply it, what you should do is go for a medium-sized brush. So I'm using a size 1 from Artisopus here. This is around about the same size as a medium layer brush from Citadel, and this is great for the parts where the two colours meet, because here we just need to be really neat. So a brush like this allows us just to load it up and then twist away the excess paint, bringing the bristles to a nice point, and then it means as we go to areas where the two colours are right next to each other, so for example on the knee just here, it means we have lots of accuracy as we paint up to that previous colour but not onto it. So with this colour we're now looking to apply it over the lower parts of both legs right down to the feet, and also on the left arm, and don't forget to do the backpack at this stage as well. And here we have the miniature with those two principal colours applied to it. Now I've had a quick look around to make sure everything's neat and tidy, because the next thing that we need to do is do some shading on these two colours, and we'll start out with a pale colour once again. In this case we're looking for some purple for the shading, but we've got to be careful not to go too far with it to make the colour too dark, because this way it'll look quite murky and there'll be a lot of work to clean things up later on. So what I'm going to do is make a mix using a wash with a medium. What I'm using is Magi Purple Wash, and I'm going to thin it down with some Lamia Medium, which will ensure the paint retains the same sort of qualities, so it'll dry nice and smooth and run into the recesses, but it's also going to weaken that colour so we don't stain things too much. So what we've got to do is create that on the palette, and to do so I'm using my size 1 brush once again. See, I've got some Magi Purple just there, and what I'm going to do is get a good puddle of Lamia Medium next to it. Now I'm looking for a roughly 50-50 mix, but if you're not sure, err on the side of having more medium than you think you're going to need, because you can always do a little bit more of a wash later on if you don't think it's quite strong enough. We just want to make sure that we don't overdo it so we have that more subtle shading going on. So I've got a good puddle of it just there. I'm just going to pull in some of the purple into it to create that diluted version of it. I'm looking for something kind of like that. So with that all mixed up, all you got to do is just load up your brush and start painting it over the pale parts of the armour's colour scheme. And what I like to do with this sort of thing is pick one panel at a time. So for example, the breastplate just here, what you do is just pick a starting point and just apply it straight over the top so that it runs into the recesses and gives us that shading. Now do your best to avoid catching the purple parts, but if you do catch them a little bit, it doesn't really matter, just try to keep it at a minimum. But otherwise for the flesh coloured parts, it's a matter of just bringing it up to this sort of point, and once you painted it to this strength over all the flesh coloured parts, give the miniature around about half an hour to dry. Once that wash is dry, you can see you've got that slightly sinister kind of Slaanesh-y tone going on there on that lighter colour. So what we can do is move on to adding some shading on the purple colour too. And here we're going to do the same sort of process, but this time using a black wash. So now I've got some Oblivion black wash and some Lamy medium. And what we want to do is prepare this just like we did before. So again, I'm going to use the size 1 brush for this. And what we've got to do is get that medium next to the black on the palette. So building up roughly the same amount of paint here, just erring slightly towards the medium. So there we go. Remember, just bring them together, and then once you've got a good thorough mix of that diluted version of the wash, we can then start painting it over these purple details. So I'm just going to make sure the brush isn't overloaded so that we don't lose control of it, because now we need to make sure we keep this just on the purple and not on the more flesh coloured parts here. So for example, on this leg, I just want to paint it straight over so the wash settles in the recesses and gives us that shading. And once that's dry too, we've also got the shading there on those purple details. So now what we'll do is move on to the next stage, which is going to be to start the process of base coating the smaller areas of detail that appear on the miniature. And we'll start out with everything that's going to be silver. Here I'm going to be using some Surcoat Silver, and to apply it, I've switched to a slightly smaller brush for a bit more control. This is a size 0 here from Ardsopa, so just a little bit smaller than the size 1. And with it, we want to get that paint thin down on the palette and under control in your brush, making sure just to twist away excess paint, bringing the bristles to a nice point, because now we're looking for kind of mechanical details and things. So for example, things such as vents, and you can see we've got one on the front of the chest right here, just want to block in details like this at this stage, but also we're looking for various silver features that appear on the weaponry. So for example, on his bolt pistol, we've got the magazine just down here. Once you finish base coating that silver, we're then ready to apply a few more base coats onto the miniature, and what we're currently doing is setting up a number of colours that are all going to share the same colour wash, which is going to be a black wash. Now the silver is one of those, but the next one needs to be an off black. So here I'm going to use some Death Reaper, and the reason why we're using an off black here is because we can shade down the recesses with the black wash, thereby getting some shading on it. With that done, we'll then move on to a warm dark brown. So here I'm going to use some Cuirass leather, and then we can finish off with that black wash. And here I'm just going to use Oblivion black wash, but undiluted this time. First of all, what we need is that Death Reaper, and to apply it I'm going to stick to my size 0 brush, and this is for a number of details scattered across the miniature. So definitely make sure you thin that paint down, and if you want to have a smaller brush on hand, then it's a good idea to do so for some really intricate parts. The choice is yours. But with this, first of all, we need to start looking for all the joints that appear in the armour. Now, for example, what we've got are areas such as this one right in the front of the body just here. All you've got to do is block it in entirely, being careful of that armour whenever you get close to it. In addition, with this colour, we're ready to look out for any pipes that appear on the miniature. So for example, we've got this one just here, and also there's various details on the weaponry, such as the casing of the bolt pistol. And then finally, if your miniature has a plume, be sure to base coat that at this stage as well. Next, we're ready to move on to Cuirass leather. So this is a dark warm brown, and this is going to be for any leather straps we can find. So for example, the belt around here. And now that we've got those base coats applied, we can move on to putting a black wash over the top of all three. So here I've got some Oblivion black wash, and this time I'm applying it with a size 0 brush just to keep it under control, because we don't need loads, and we also need to make sure that we keep it focused just on these new colours, especially whenever you get close to that pale colour there on the armour. Now that wash is dry, we can move on to adding another colour onto the miniature, because it's time to get some gold on there. And here what we want to go for is a very pale gold. So I'm going to use glistening gold as a base coat. And then for a wash, I'm going to be using some Magi purple wash to give it that slightly sort of Slaanesh-y feel. But we need to start out with a base coat of glistening gold. And to apply this one, I'm going to be using my size 0 brush again. But as always, feel free to go for a smaller brush if you want to. The key thing here is to make sure that you don't pick out the trim as you block it in this detail, because remember, unusually, the trim isn't a different colour from the main armour panels. But what you do want to be looking for instead is any decorations and things, such as little icons of Slaanesh. Now these will commonly appear on the weaponry, so for example there's one right here, but I am going to be looking for ones that appear on the armour too, just to break up the colour a little bit. So for example, there's one right here on the chest that I'm going to be picking out carefully at this stage as well. And once you're happy with all that gold detail, the next thing to do is move on to a purple wash. So here I've got some Magi purple wash, and with the size 0 brush, I'm just going to be painting it directly over the top of all the gold. And here we have the miniature with that gold dry as well. So with that done, we can now move on to the next phase, which is to clean up some of the major colours before we move into highlighting the miniature. And here we'll start out with that original colour we put on the miniature. So that sort of pale flesh-like colour that we've got. And here we're going to be layering it on just to clean things up. So in our case, that's back to Elven Skin. And to apply it, I'm going for my size 0 brush for this application. And what we want to do is just get this thin down on the palette so it's a little bit translucent. So I'm just going to add some water into it, small amounts at a time, just thinning it down until we're at about this sort of consistency here, you see. So you can just see the palette showing through. With that mix then, we can just make sure to remove the excess paint off the brush so that we're not putting on loads at once. And then it's time to start reapplying this onto these pale parts of the armour. But this time, rather than just blocking the whole thing in, we're looking to carefully avoid recessed detail. So for example, on the shoulder, you can see I'm just focusing on the main arc of it just around here. But as I get close to the recess where it meets that trim, I'm not going quite into the corner to retain that purple that we've got in that recess there. And it's basically just going to be this across all these pale parts. So all the while, we're just looking to very carefully work our way around like this, always making sure not to drop into any recesses as we encounter them. Once that stage is done, you can see that pale skin colour is much cleaner there in the armour panels. So what we can do is the same thing now on two other colours, starting out with that purple. Here again, you want to go back to the original colour you used. So in our case, that's going to be some amethyst rain. And then we'll do the same thing with that pale gold by going back to that original gold. So here I'm going to use some glistening gold. But first of all, we should do that purple. So I'm using amethyst rain here. And again, I'm going for the size 0 brush to apply it. And this is going to be mostly the same sort of thing as what we just did on that lighter colour. Again, you just need to make sure the paint's thinned down and under control on your brush, just making sure you got that good point. And then we can start looking for the purple regions of the armour and reapplying this colour to it. So for example, this part of the leg right here is going to apply onto the flat region just there, being careful of the recesses as we get close to them around that trim. Now, in addition, with this colour, there is an extra feature you can add, and it is entirely optional, but that is to add the sort of tentacle style patterns that sometimes appear on their armour. Now, generally, this appears on this leg panel here, so the inner thigh, and also it appears on the shoulder plate as well. And if you decide you want to do it, what you should do is just pick a starting point. So, for example, around here, just go to a point at that sort of region just there, and then just do a very fine wavy line just running down there like that. Now from this starting point, we can start to widen out the pattern. So I'm just going to take it ever so slightly further, just going up to a point just there. And then I'm going to start widening it out like that so it gets thicker towards the base. And there we go, we've got that tentacle pattern just there. And basically all you do is just repeat this pattern, just working your way around until you're happy with it. Now, as I mentioned, this is entirely optional and you don't have to do it, but if you decide to do so, it looks best on this part of the armour just here and on the shoulder pauldron as well. Finished doing the layering there on the purple, and you can see I've done that pattern all the way around that armour plate, and I've also added it onto the inside of that shoulder pad up there as well. And so with that done, we can now move on to the next colour for layering, which is going to be the gold. Here I'm returning to glistening gold, again being applied to the size 0 brush, and it's just a matter of once again focusing on those flat parts of all the golden details. And with that, you can see the shine has been returned to all those golden details. And so if you now want to, you could skip ahead in this video to painting the eye lenses, and then all you'll have to do is to put the transfers on the miniature, paint the base, and your model's going to look great on the tabletop. And in fact, if you paint your whole army up to that standard, it's going to look really cool. But if you want them to really pop out, then highlighting will do that. So what we're going to do is now show you optionally how you can highlight all the details if you want to. And the first one should be that main pale colour of the armour, in which case what we need is a light bone colour. So I'm going to use Vampire Fang for this. If you decide you want to do it, what you'll now need is a fine brush that holds a really good point. So I've gone down to a size 00 here from Artsopus. This is around about the same size as a small layer brush from Citadel, so same sort of thing, but really that fine point is important because with this colour we're now looking to follow all the sharp edges and angles that appear on the pale parts of that armour. So the trick to doing this is to make sure firstly that you thin the paint down to the correct point. So we're looking for it to be a little bit runny, quite smooth, about that sort of consistency there. And the next thing to do is to make sure you remove excess paint off your brush because it's very easy to overdo this. I just want to load up fresh there like that, so it looks like there's not that much paint on your brush, but it's nice and damp. It's the right sort of consistency for what we need, and also we've got that good point there for lots of control. Because with this, on the pale parts of the armour now, we're looking for all the sharp edges and angles, such as this outline here on the shoulder pad, and because it stands up so much, what you can do is use the side of the brush and just skim along like that, leaving that sharp, lighter line going all the way around, which you can see just neatly and easily highlights that panel there like that. Now, you won't always be able to use the side of your brush, though you can with a lot of these details in these miniatures, because a lot of these edges are actually fluted up, so you can see on the underside of the shoulder pad, I can do there. Just turn the model around to approach in this direction here. It's really all about just making sure that you're comfortable so you can skim along with the brush there like that. But when you can't quite reach with the side of the brush, then it's time to use the tip. In this case, what I like to do is just angle the miniature so I'm painting in a downward motion towards myself, and then you can just see nice and easily what you're doing, and it's just a matter with the tip of the brush just following that edge all the way around, such as down the inside of this shoulder pad panel just there. Now this stage will be the longest one of painting the entire miniature because there are quite a few edges to do here, but it's definitely one to take your time with because the neater you are here, the better the miniature is going to look in the end. And with that done, you can see the result is that all the detail on the pale parts of the armour is now standing out really nicely. And again, you could leave it here if you want to and then move on to highlight the purple, but you might want to take it a little bit further, maybe just for your commanders, squad leaders, anything like that. And if you decide you want to do so, what you'll now need is a pale ivory. So I'm going to use some ivory tusk for this, and with it we're going to do a fine edge highlight. So to do it, you want to use the same sort of brush, using the size 00 again here, and just like with that previous edge highlight, I want to thin the paint down so it's nice and thin, a little bit runny, a little bit translucent there like that. Remove off the excess off your brush so that you don't have much on there, and then it's time to start looking for edges and angles that really stand out. So for example, in the shoulder pauldrons, that's going to be things such as these corners just down here. We're just going to flick a little bit on there like that. We're going to do the top of them where the light would catch across there, and again you just graze it on with the side of your brush, just skimming along gently there like that. We can also do some on the face, and here it's going to be things such as the top of the mouthpiece, so just a little bit on either side right there, and also things such as the brow just in here. And with that, the pale parts of the armour are now completed, and so it's time to move on to highlighting the purple parts. And for this, what you'll now want is a lighter purple than you used for that original colour. So in our case, I'm going to be using some Sorcerer's Cloak. And then if you did that second highlight on the pale parts, you should do the same thing on the purple parts to make sure everything's in balance. So I'm going to do that as well. In this case, I'm going to be using Runic Purple. But first of all, we need some Sorcerer's Cloak, and to apply it, I'm going to go for the size 00 brush again, because the application for this one is going to be just the same as that first edge highlight that we did on the light parts earlier on. Again, just thin that paint down so it's nicely under control on your brush, being careful not to overload it, and then we can start looking for all the edges and angles on the purple parts of the armour, such as on the back of the leg just here, where I'm going to use the side of the brush to skim along. Remember, when you're doing this, just turn the model so that you're comfortable and use the side of it just to follow that edge all the way along. And then if you want to take the purple a little bit further, you can move on with a fine edge highlight with a lighter purple. So here I've got some Runic Purple, and just like with that lighter colour earlier, what we're looking for are the parts that really stand out, such as the top of this knee, and just want to skim a little bit this colour onto that part. And with that, the purple armour is complete too, so it's time to highlight some of the smaller details on the miniature, and we'll start out with the black. Here all you need is a dark grey, so I'm going to use some Dungeon Stone Grey. With that done, it's then time for the metallics. So for the silver, we want a really bright silver. Here I'm using Mithril Blade. And then for the gold, we'll need a platinum, so in this case I'm going to use some Platinum Crown. Finally, there's just a very small amount of leather we need to highlight, and here we want a reddish brown, so I'm going to use some boar hide for this. But first of all, we should highlight the black, so here I'm using Dungeon Stone Grey, and to apply it I'm sticking to my size 00 brush here, and with this, again, just make sure that paint's nicely thinned down in your palette, and just be careful to make sure that your brush isn't overloaded with too much paint, because with this we're looking for, well, edges and angles when it comes to details such as the casing on his bolt pistol. So you can see around here I'm just going to use the side of the brush to skim along that angle, but we also have to make sure we get these ridges and all the joints of the armour here. Now, to get access to these is a little bit tricky, but what I like to do is turn the model, so I'm approaching with the side of the brush, and then skim along them where possible like that, just to pick out some of those ridges. You won't always quite be able to reach it like this, so in those cases, such as the parts that we've got on the back of the leg, as you can see just behind the knee right there, in this case all you've got to do is just pick out one or two of them with a few lines of this colour. Once that's done, we can then highlight the silver details using a bright silver. So here I've got some Mithril Blade, and this is another edge highlight. So once more, we're looking for all the edges and angles. I want to carefully follow along to pick them out. Now the silver's done, we can move on to highlighting the gold, and because we've got such a pale gold, we'll need a platinum here. So I'm using some Platinum Crown, and this is going to be an edge highlight just like we did with the silver. And then finally we can highlight the leather, and for this what you need is a warm brown. So I've got some boar hide, and with it we just want to pick out the edges of all the leather straps, such as just along here and then just along here. And with that, all those details are now highlighted, so it's time to move on to the finishing touches, which are to paint the eye lenses of this Chaos Space Marine. And here you got a choice, because for this particular warband, sometimes the eyes are depicted in red and sometimes they're blue. Now, personally, I think the red's a bit more striking, so I'm going to go with that. And to do it, we need to start out with a deep red. So here I'm going to use Asmodeus red. Then we need a small amount of a bright orange. So here I'm going to use some orange flare. We'll start out with Asmodeus red, and to apply it, stick to your small brush. So again, I'm using my size 00 here, and with this first colour, we just need to base coat the eye lenses. So just get that paint thin down on your brush, and just like when we're doing those highlights, be sure to make sure that it's under control. You don't want very much on there, so you want to make sure that it doesn't start flowing all around the area that we're painting here. And what you need to do, just brace your hands to be as steady as possible, and carefully go in, and we're looking to block in the central part of the eye, leaving that darker line around the outside that we got from the shading earlier on. So for example, I'm just going to start here and just carefully work our way around like this, just to base coat the whole eye lens with that red. And now that's done, it's then time to add a bright orange into each eye lens. So here I've got some orange flare, and what you're going to do is just brace your hands to be as steady as possible, carefully go in and paint a line of this colour right in the middle of each one. Now with this done, it's then time to apply the transfers to your miniature, and then it's time to base it. And as ever, it's entirely up to you what basing scheme you go for, but in this case, I'm going to go for an urban rubble base. With the base now fully painted, this Chaos Space Marine of the Flawless Host is complete and ready to go forth and prove to everyone in the galaxy that he is absolutely incapable of doing anything wrong. So painting this colour scheme is a lot of fun because it's quite unusual compared to most Chaos Space Marine armies in that the banding is not a different colour but instead is the same colour as the main armour panel. This means starting out is very straightforward, but I definitely recommend you start out for a pale undercoat here because that really makes painting that sort of fleshy tone that forms the main part of their armour a nice straightforward process. Now when you're doing the wash over it too, definitely make sure that you thin that wash down with some medium because this way you will avoid staining it, making it too dark, and you'll get that nice soft appearance that you're looking for. So have fun painting this warband, and we'll see you again very soon.